Ethan Blackwell was a billionaire tech genius with no interest in family, until the day he unknowingly adopted his own biological twins, the secret children of his missing ex-wife, Clara Wren. What began as an act of charity unraveled into a chilling conspiracy, a mysterious death, and a truth buried beneath years of betrayal. In 2021, Ethan Blackwell made a decision that shocked the business world and intrigued the public. Known as a cold, calculating figure in the tech industry, Ethan had built his empire from scratch and transformed his cybersecurity company, Cyphertech, into one of the most powerful firms in Silicon Valley. He rarely made public appearances, avoided social media, and was infamous for his no-nonsense attitude toward business and life. So when news quietly surfaced that he had adopted twins, 5-year-old siblings from a private agency in Northern California, it sent ripples through the media and raised more questions than answers. The adoption was carried out in total secrecy, with no official announcement, no photos, and no interviews. Word only got out because a former employee at the adoption agency anonymously tipped off a blogger, claiming that a high-profile tech figure had taken in 2 children under unusual circumstances. Within days, reporters speculated and narrowed it down to Ethan. Paparazzi tried to catch glimpses of the children near his estate, but they were kept out of sight, guarded by security and hidden behind tall hedges and walls. According to leaked details, the twins, named Ava and Leo, had come from a closed adoption. Their birth records were sealed. The mother had allegedly died shortly after giving birth, and no known relatives were found. The agency placed them in temporary foster care until a suitable guardian was located. Ethan's legal team, known for their ability to bend rules without breaking them, had moved swiftly to secure custody. There were whispers that the billionaire had bypassed the usual waiting lists, background checks and interviews, instead making a generous financial donation that sped up the process. What was especially strange was the timing. Ethan had never expressed an interest in starting a family. He had no known partner, no history of fostering or adopting, and certainly no indication that he had softened with age. In fact, just months before the adoption, he'd announced a major restructuring of Cyphertech, laying off hundreds of employees and shifting focus toward artificial intelligence projects. He seemed more obsessed with control and innovation than with human connection. But almost overnight, something changed. Construction began on a new wing of his estate, decorated not with sterile modern tech, but with child-friendly art, soft colors, and custom-designed furniture. He hired full-time nannies, tutors, and therapists. His schedule shifted. Meetings were cancelled. Board members were told he was taking an indefinite partial leave to focus on personal responsibilities. It was a complete departure from the Ethan Blackwell the world thought it knew. The public grew curious, but Ethan refused to comment. Any inquiries were deflected by his PR team. His silence only deepened the mystery. Why these children? Why now? And who were they really behind the carefully guarded gates? Ethan tried to adjust to fatherhood. But as he began learning about the twins, their personalities, their habits, their strange familiarity, something didn't feel right. There was a connection he couldn't explain, a sense of recognition he couldn't shake. The more time he spent with them, the more he began to feel that this adoption wasn't just a coincidence. It felt like something he had been meant to do, but didn't yet understand why. 9 months after the adoption, Ethan Blackwell's carefully controlled world was disrupted by a mistake that seemed small at first. A clerical error, a simple mix-up. One afternoon, a red folder was left on his desk by an assistant who had been filling in for someone on leave. Ethan wasn't expecting anything unusual, but the moment he opened the folder, everything changed. Inside were scanned documents related to the twins' original birth records. Information he was never meant to see. His legal team had made it clear from the beginning. The adoption was closed, the files sealed, and no personal details would be disclosed. Yet here, in plain text, were 2 birth certificates. The first name that caught Ethan's eye was the mother's, Clara Wren. He stared at it, frozen. Clara was a name from a life he thought was long behind him. His ex-wife. The woman he had once loved more than anything, and the same woman who had disappeared without warning 6 years ago. The moment felt surreal. He flipped through the documents, reading and rereading the lines as if they might change. Both certificates listed Clara Wren as the mother. The father's name was blank. The children had been born in a private wellness center in Oregon, far from Silicon Valley and anything remotely connected to Ethan's world. For years, he had believed that Clara had walked away because of the pressure, the media attention, and the fertility struggles that had fractured their marriage. After multiple failed rounds of IVF and growing emotional distance, Clara had simply left. There was no fight, no dramatic goodbye. One morning she was gone. A handwritten note and a signed divorce agreement were the only things she left behind. Ethan had accepted it in his own detached way, buried himself in work, shut the door on anything emotional. But now, staring at the names on those birth certificates, something inside him cracked open. He needed answers. The coincidence was too bizarre to ignore. Could Clara have had children without telling him? Could these twins, adopted in what seemed like an act of fate, actually be his? He contacted a private DNA testing firm, instructing his head of security to discreetly collect samples from the twins. No one was to know, not his staff, not the nannies, not his legal team. Within 72 hours, the results came back. The match was undeniable. Ethan Blackwell was the biological father of Ava and Leo. Shock turned into confusion. Confusion turned into anger, then fear. How had this happened? Had Clara hidden the pregnancy on purpose? Why hadn't she come to him or told him she was pregnant before leaving? And how had his biological children ended up in the adoption system, treated as orphans and handed over to him by chance? The questions kept coming, and so did the unease. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a tragic coincidence. It was something deeper, something buried. Clara had vanished. The twins had slipped through the cracks of the system, and now they were back in his life by sheer accident, or maybe not by accident at all. The DNA results confirmed what Ethan had feared but couldn't deny. He was the biological father of Ava and Leo. The neatly printed report left no room for doubt. Each child shared 99.9% of his genetic markers. There had been no mistake. The twins he had adopted out of what he thought was compassion were, in fact, his own children. It wasn't fate. It wasn't coincidence. It was a secret that had somehow found its way back to him. Ethan stared at the report for hours, struggling to process what it meant. His mind kept returning to Clara. If she had carried his children, why hadn't she told him? Why had she left without a word about the pregnancy? Their last year together had been strained, cold even. But nothing could justify keeping something this important from him. They had tried so hard to start a family. The failed fertility treatments, the arguments, the silence that followed, it had all pushed them apart. But clearly she had become pregnant before the divorce was finalized. He needed answers that no piece of paper could give him. So he hired a private investigator, someone discreet and thorough, with no connections to his company or personal network. He instructed the investigator to trace Clara's steps from the moment she left their home to the day of her supposed death. The trail led to Oregon, where Clara had checked into a remote wellness and birthing center under an alias. She'd used cash and fake documentation to cover her tracks. The twins were born in early 2016. After that, records grew scarce. She appeared to live quietly for about 2 years, renting a modest house and working remotely as a copy editor. Then, in mid-2018, the trail went cold. According to official reports, Clara died in a car accident just outside of Bend, Oregon. Her vehicle had gone off the road late at night. The crash was labeled an accident, her death declared immediate. But something about the reports felt off. There were no details about funeral arrangements, no mention of family being contacted. The police report was oddly vague, missing standard elements that would typically be included in such cases. Clara had been buried under the name she used at the birthing center, meaning no legal connection was ever made between her and Ethan or the children. The investigator dug deeper, eventually locating the foster home where Ava and Leo had been placed after Clara's death. It was a short-term facility used when no immediate guardians could be found. According to records, the children were listed as wards of the state with no known relatives. The mother had not left behind a will nor any emergency contacts. Ethan realized the truth was being buried piece by piece. Clara had gone to great lengths to disappear and protect the twins. But from what? Or whom? It didn't feel like the actions of someone running from a failed marriage. It felt like she had been hiding from something much darker, something she couldn't escape. As the investigator dug further into Clara's past, the threads began to unravel into something far more sinister than Ethan had anticipated. What began as a search for personal closure quickly turned into a descent into a hidden world of manipulation, threats, and calculated erasure. Clara hadn't simply vanished out of grief or desperation. She had been deliberately silenced. The car crash that supposedly took her life was the first red flag. The police report was missing key photographs, the autopsy results were oddly generalized, and the medical examiner listed blunt force trauma without specifics. A second opinion, commissioned quietly by Ethan, raised serious doubts. Clara had injuries inconsistent with a simple crash. More troubling, she had no visible seatbelt injuries, despite being found in the driver's seat. The airbag had deployed, but showed no trace of blood or tissue, suggesting she may have already been unconscious or even dead before the vehicle collided with the embankment. Records showed that the crash investigation had been swiftly closed within a week. For a woman with no known family or legal ties, it was all too convenient. Ethan's investigator discovered that the mortuary listed a third-party contractor as the one who claimed Clara's body. The name used was fake, and the address linked to a now-defunct office in Sacramento. Someone had gone to a great deal of effort to make sure Clara Wren was wiped off the map. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Buried in the internal email archives of Cyphertech, emails Ethan hadn't looked at in years were fragments of a trail pointing to someone he once trusted. Thomas Vale, a former board member and one of Ethan's closest colleagues during The height of Cyphertech's rise had been involved in backdoor operations during Ethan's chaotic divorce. At the time, Ethan had been distracted, juggling legal battles, public scrutiny over a company data leak, and mounting pressure from investors. Vale had stepped in as a stabilizing force, helping shield Ethan's public image. But behind the scenes, he had been manipulating internal systems, leaking selective information, and feeding stories to the media. Clara had found out. Email correspondence revealed that she had confronted Vale, threatening to expose him for insider trading and corporate espionage. She had evidence, and she planned to go public with it. That was shortly before she disappeared. Realizing her life, and possibly her children's lives, were in danger, Clara had fled. She changed her name, moved states, and kept her pregnancy a secret. She lived quietly, off the grid, trying to wait out the chaos. But Vale's reach extended further than she had anticipated. Ethan now believed that her death wasn't an accident. It was a cleanup job. A way to make sure she never resurfaced. The most chilling part was this. Vale had also invested in the same private adoption agency that had placed Ava and Leo. Whether by design or chance, the twins had ended up in Ethan's custody. Now, with pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place, Ethan knew one thing for sure. Clara had died trying to protect their children from a threat she couldn't outrun. Ethan Blackwell moved quickly and quietly once he understood the depth of the betrayal. For years he had built a reputation as a calculated strategist, someone who thrived in high-stakes environments. But this was personal, and it demanded more than corporate precision. It required a level of control that didn't involve headlines or legal battles. It required silence and certainty. He began gathering every shred of evidence against Thomas Vale. Archived server logs, hidden financial transfers, encrypted communications, all of it was recovered through a team of cybersecurity experts he trusted implicitly. What emerged was a clear pattern of sabotage. Vale had been siphoning confidential data, manipulating market positions, and leaking information during the most vulnerable moments of Ethan's career. Clara had found out, and when she tried to act, she had become a liability. Ethan took care not to alert Vale. He created a private task force formed outside of Cyphertech with no digital footprint. Over the course of 6 months, they built a case that couldn't be challenged. Emails, voice recordings, financial ledgers, and internal communications that linked Vale to Clara's disappearance and to criminal activity within the company. When Ethan finally approached federal authorities, he handed them everything in a single black folder. There was no press conference, no statements, just a transfer of power and proof. Vale was arrested at his vineyard estate in Napa County, far removed from the tech world he'd helped pollute. The charges ranged from insider trading to obstruction of justice to conspiracy. The story dominated headlines for days, though Ethan's name was carefully kept out of it. His lawyers ensured that his involvement remained buried, just like the pain he had carried for years. But the justice didn't bring peace. Ethan still had to face what had been lost. Clara's grave, once unmarked and forgotten under a false identity, was relocated and given her real name. Ethan designed a small garden on his private estate, off-limits to everyone. It was quiet, filled with white roses, and overlooked a pond. There, he placed a single plaque with her name, her birth and death dates, and the inscription, "She protected what mattered most." He updated Ava and Leo's records to reflect the truth. He was listed now not only as their adoptive father, but their biological one. Slowly, he began to introduce pieces of Clara's story to them. Photos, small items she had left behind, memories carefully preserved in boxes. He wanted them to grow up knowing who she was, what she had done for them, and how far she went to keep them safe. Life didn't return to normal. It changed completely. Ethan no longer returned to Cyphertech full-time. Instead, he restructured the company to run under a trusted executive team while he focused on raising the twins. The man once known for ruthless efficiency now spent his mornings packing lunchboxes and his evenings reading bedtime stories. The past had nearly been erased, but now it had been reclaimed. And in that quiet redemption, Ethan found the one thing he never expected to recover: family.